Is there anything about yourself that you wish that people could understand a little bit better, that they wouldn't get wrong so often? It's that way for me. I have a recurring nightmare. I have it less frequently now than earlier in my life, but the nightmare would go like this. I would just be talking, just like I'm talking right now, and people would stare at me as though I were speaking gibberish. I'm looking for those looks right now. In this nightmare, I knew what I wanted to say. And to my ear, I was saying it, but the people I was talking to, they would just look at me alarmed, or they would smile and lift an eyebrow. They'd condescend. And in a little while, they'd all just ignore me, and they'd be talking to each other while I talked and talked and talked. Listen to me. Another weird thing about this dream is that as I talked, my plain, intelligible words would even start sounding kind of strange to me. And pretty soon, I would hear myself as though I were speaking gibberish, even though I knew that deeper down, my words were making sense. At least my thoughts were. And so, giving it a little bit of interpretation, it must be that I carry some deep fear, which my brain, while I'm sleeping, confronts. This is a fear that people don't understand me, that I'm not communicating well, that I get my words wrong sometimes, that I call Elizabeth Street Epworth, whatever it is. People are going to take me the wrong way. And it seems furthermore true that there's a part of me that disagrees with this people who cannot understand, who do not understand, who will not understand. That everybody saying, you make no sense, that everyone is right about this. And I wonder if we all carry a little bit of this. Some fear that we're not making what we want to make known. This is a strange thing to have one's clear words transformed into nothingness, into a clamor of sounds, sounds that were not intended. It's strange to stand on the turrets of the Tower of Babel and to be misunderstood by people one knows, people one has known for years. In the church, we spend a lot of time talking about how the language of God, this language of love and justice, how it transcends natural languages, so that a person who speaks Swahili might manifest the gospel through action to a person who speaks, say, Chinese. And between them, there is a deep down kinship more powerful than words. I don't doubt this. Even as I know that we're constantly frustrated in our ability to communicate even our most basic intentions, I don't doubt this. God may know who we are and what we want to say, but it can seem that the world has already made up their mind who we are. And sometimes it seems that this callous world doesn't seem to care that we are trying to say something else, even something new. Bearing this in mind, my nightmare in mind, and our difficulty communicating, I think about poor Jeremiah, who in this passage suddenly hears God loud and clear. And God now commissions Jeremiah to speak the strange language of prophecy in Israel, a language that is very often not welcome. God says to Jeremiah that this boy was known to God since before he was formed in his mother's womb, since before conception, and that before he took bodily form, still Jeremiah was a prophet to the nations. And this boy, he's taken aback, as prophets usually are when they receive their calls. And he protests in classical manner. He says, I'm not ready, God. I'm only a boy. And God says, don't say this, and don't be afraid, because I will send you to people who need to hear your voice. And when you're there, I will tell you what to say. God touches Jeremiah's mouth and puts words on his tongue. If we read the whole book of Jeremiah today, we would see that it wasn't all pie. After that, we'll see that the prophet will have a long career of traveling around Israel, being understood by some and misunderstood by a lot of others, taken seriously by some, jeered at, laughed at by a lot of others. What Jeremiah says about Israel is not going to fit everybody's experience of Israel, everybody's need for Israel at that moment. And so Jeremiah must often have had the sense that though God is deeply acquainted with him, makes him eloquent in the language of heaven, still, most of his briefer acquaintances, these kings and officials and gatherings he preaches before, they're staring at him like he's preaching gibberish in a nightmare. They look at him startled, they jeer, they go back to talking to one another, and it's just business as usual. I think today about trans and non-binary people who have, in painstaking ways, attempted to communicate what it's like to be trans and non-binary, who have patiently explained their experience and their needs, and who have made simple prophetic requests. Access to medicine, access to facilities, to services, to opportunities that match their known gender. Different pronouns. How hard is this? I think about the clearness and simplicity of the words of trans people and reflect that people refuse to hear these clearly, but instead look on with amazed confusion, make cruel jokes, react by passing brutal legislation, declaring cruel, uncomprehending executive orders. I hear trans and non-binary people saying, "But you haven't understood me. You're either helpless to understand me, or maybe you're willfully twisting my words for political gain, willfully warping my needs, my identity. You're denying the meaning of my words and of my person." The last 2 weeks have attempted to roll back a lot of things, including 30 years of slowly and hard-won public understanding for sexual and gender minorities. They have, with a few actions, declared gibberish the meanings of trans and non-binary people, of LGBTQ people generally. In a scientific establishment that vouches this is real, parents and friends and allies who vouch from deep acquaintance, from love, that all of this is something. And yet, there's an attempt to make it nothing because of those who refuse deeper acquaintance. Because so many of us refuse, and I say us, to accept beauty as God created it. So many of us cradle ourselves in simplistic stories. I know I do. Blunt stories about reality, that there is only, for instance, a binary of male and female, that there are superior races out there, that marriage should look like a Dick and Jane story, that undocumented immigrants are a menace. Whatever it is, we choose piggish and infantile myths of reaction to explain the world. And these narratives, they constitute an injustice to those who speak clearly and who make reasonable requests for welcome and accommodation. Jeremiah warned Israel that selfishness and injustice would bring invading armies and destroy the gates and level even the temple of God. And then it happened, and the gates were destroyed and the temple was set on fire. and there was despair and lamentation. And our world is not a perfect analogy for that one, but these currents run through everything. There was despair and lamentation. And then something else happened, didn't it? And we know what it was because we have the story of the Bible. And this story tells us that the voice of God, despite all of this, was not silenced. But in the wreckage and the pain, the voice of God persisted, as it must. In exile, the voice of God grew louder. And from lack of comfort, from lack of options, the voice of God grew bolder. And soon, prophecy towered like an angel over Babylon. And the people became acquainted, deeply acquainted with one another. The gates of Jerusalem were rebuilt, even the temple eventually. The Bible also tells us, even in our passage today, that this voice is within us, established by God so deep down that often we cannot hear it over the clamor out there. But it is an unshakable, unmovable thing. It is our tree by the waterside. It existed before we were born. It is our essence. It is God's image, and it will be heard. It is the light, the good, the beauty of all human history. Let's this week then know ourselves and trust what we are saying, and know each other and trust and hear each other. Let's never stop connecting, never stop communicating, never be silenced, but always speak that truth within. And in this way, may we follow Christ, who lives and speaks and is heard among us. May it be so in the name of the one who was, and who is to come. Amen.